Hey everyone, welcome back to Faith in Question. I've got a special episode for you today talking to someone that I went to Bible college with 20 years ago. The reason why I think you're going to find this conversation fascinating is because we've both drifted away from our fundamentalism beliefs, but we're in different places today. I'm much more of a skeptic, but Justin has maintained a version of his faith. I think you're going to be interested to hear more about that. So we're going to talk about a variety of issues. We're going to talk about universalism and everybody going to heaven. We'll also talk about sexuality and how God actually views sexuality. What does the Bible have to say? And we'll have a really interesting discussion about the percentage. How certain are we that the Bible is true or false? I think you're going to enjoy this one, so make sure you give this video a thumbs up. We're going to dive right into the content together. Let's go see Justin. All right. Justin, how you doing?
Doing good. Doing good.
Excellent, excellent. It's good to see you. It's been a while. Excited for this conversation, and I know you're in an interesting place with your faith, so I want to dive right into that, especially when we're talking
hmm
about this topic of deconstruction. And I think it's a journey. It's fluid. People are in different places,
hmm
but we both came out of the fundamentalism path, and we'll talk a lot about that. But one of the things I always get from fundamentalists when we're talking about deconstruction is they first go to sin. You just want to leave the church, you want to leave God so you can sin because you just love sinning so much. So my first question for you is what is that sin that you love so much that you had to completely change your view of God to be able to commit it all the time?
Um, this is gonna sound a little like hacky, but like literally loving my neighbor. Like seriously, that's what hit it. It's like, oh, you don't want me to love trans people? Oh, well, okay, whatever. Bye.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's going to be some really interesting stuff to get into on that, right? Because I know we'll talk a lot about, you know, LGBTQIA,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like thoughts around that, how that fits in with God. But there's a whole bunch of things from our past, and I have to kind of set the stage for
hmm
people that um, we met in Bible college 20 years ago,
hmm
right? Both studying theology at a very independent fundamental Baptist, like the epitome of evangelical fundamentalism,
hmm
right? Hardcore. And there were just like some crazy things. When I look back on it now, we haven't spoken in 15 years, right? When I look back on it now and I think about the kind of things that we believed, and I'm curious what some of these would be for you when you just think about the wildest beliefs that you had. And I'll give you an example, like from my side, because one of the beliefs that I had was literally everybody else was going to hell, right? You had those who were just unsaved, unbelievers. They were going to hell. Of course, the Muslims, all 2 billion of them were going to hell. But also, we believe that other Christians were going to hell. So there's over 1 billion Catholics in the world who are trying their best to live live their lives for God,
hmm
trying their best to please God and do just basically be good people. And we absolutely believed that they were on their path to hell because they had corrupted salvation. Remember this? They
Yep.
corrupted salvation by trying to work their way to heaven. Like that's what we actually believed.
hmm
And it was like just so deep in our systems, but then also even Protestants, other Protestants were going to hell because you had the Presbyterians who believed that they had the election of the saints, right, and predestination of the saints, and that they didn't have to accept salvation. God chose beforehand who was going to be saved. Like, so I just think about that now, and I'm like, we really thought that like this little sliver of Christianity, we were the only ones doing it right.
hmm
So, what are other things that are just kind of come up for you when you think about some of the craziest stuff that we used to believe?
You got me on a tangent when you just mentioned the how even other Protestant denominations, and I've just started thinking about that
Hey, we can go down that path if you want.
and how because that was part of what it really hit me though was is there was so much uh worship of religious logic. I mean, it was very much to me when we were going there like hearing two nerds argue whether Superman or Goku was better when we were debating theology,
Yeah.
and they would use the same sort of logic that nerds would use to okay, this the predestination, oh no, this and that, and it's kind of that. To me it was the one of the things was that worship of logic. It's not a specific theology, but that worship of we believe that we are right
Yeah.
because A plus B equals C, and just hitting it down that. And then the other areas where they just would ignore that logic,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's like, but what about this? It's like, it's like, what about sexual ethics?
Uh-huh.
why are we going to rehome a youth pastor who's committed sexual assault against a minor, and but yet when teen gets pregnant out of wedlock, that's the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's like one of those is actually a sin, and it's like, and if you can't figure out which one is actually a sin, that's a
Yeah.
problem. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the one that always got me was you think about the same kind of thing where yes, we've got this logic train that's running for
hmm
all these things that we have the perfect answer for,
hmm
but the phrase that always comes up, and I always tell people, like when you're talking to a fundamentalist, you know when you've got them because they always go to this phrase: "Are you smarter than God?" Right? You think you're smarter than God because there's nothing left logically to come back with when you get to that point of the argument, and they'll always go to that phrase and say, "Well, God's ways are higher than our ways," and so, yeah, that's I don't have to give you a logical rebuttal. It's funny.
that I'm glad no one's used that on me because that would be oh, that's so bad.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
I'll give you one more that I think is interesting that we used to
I will say, sorry, I just thought of
go
a
for it.
comeback though. I
Yeah.
am smarter than your God.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It's funny. You know, thinking about the environment that we came out of, and that's why I'm so excited to have this conversation. But there's one other thing that I was just remembering today
hmm
as it relates to tithes, specifically to tithes, like
hmm
giving 10% of your income to the church.
hmm
And the number of times a year, probably eh, more than 10% of the sermons had something to do with tithing. Right? Because it was important to make sure that they were kept reminding people about the tithe. But they always went to the fear side of things, which is a theme
hmm
in evangelicalism, but it was God's gonna get his money. He's gonna get his money, whether
One
you
way or
give it
another.
into the offering plate or your car breaks down or you lose your job or whatever. He's gonna get his money. And I mean, like and oh, and by the way, you tithe on the gross, not the net,
hmm
because you want God's blessing on the gross and not the net. Like, these are the types of things that they're looking for theological points to make
Yeah,
about this. And like it blows my mind thinking about it today.
yeah. And see, like, my church itself was a little bit more subdued, but the fact is we were having fellowship with churches that believe that,
Yeah.
so it was in and surrounding us, and it's like, all that stuff is like, we hardly heard message on tithing, but it was still there, and occasionally the evangelist would come by. I will say though, he had he had one of the best anecdotes because he wasn't paying his tithe when he was a baby Christian, and he lost his big toe to a lawnmower. And so his pastor said, "You weren't paying your tithe. God got his due." And it's like, I'm like,
This when you try to explain everything,
mm-hmm,
every circumstance in your
mm-hmm,
life, at some point you start looking foolish, right?
mm-hmm.
And and th- there's much more to get into, so we'll dig into it. But hey, listen, Justin, take us back. Tell us a bit of your story because obviously I just laid out the we have the same background in coming out of that, but we haven't caught up. So obviously I need the abbreviated version of it. But when did your faith start to crack, and where has that led you? What does that look like?
Um, so the my faith in a lot of ways, the my faith cracking was the religious part of it, because it's like I was clinging very strongly to, you know, Jesus Christ and everything, but there was so many incongruities between what I was raised and taught and what Baptists were practicing at greater as large, what fundamentalism was, and what my church was. And, you know, a lot of times my church would be the bedrock for me. It's like, oh, yeah, that's the rest of fundamentalism, but my church is cool, ish.
Mm-hmm.
So, like they had even technically exited the fundamentalist movement, technically. But I
Okay.
mean, practically speaking, everyone that went there was still a fundamentalist.
I
E-
think is this the same church that you went to growing up?
yeah,
I think I kind of remember when your church left the fundamentalist movement and it was a big to do. Like people
yeah,
were like, "Oh man, that they've gone contemporary. They've gone neo."
yeah. But it's like it's like there's a lot of issues with fundamentalism, even from their point of view at that time. And and but even exiting that, there was still so much fundamentalist influence that it was practically the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it was different. Yes, a lot of what I had was a bedrock that helped me deconstruct a lot easier than a lot of people,
Yeah.
but it was still that. I even before I so I was youth leader, unpaid, by the way, which I
Okay.
didn't figure out that I should have been paid until 2 years after I was gone. But I was youth leader for about 10 years or so, and doing all this stuff while in college. And one of the things that kind of was a window into me wanting to me starting to break down was I actually started a youth rally,
Okay.
uh, and it was specifically because look, all the adults in your life are hypocrites. Let's and I called it get real. Let's get real. And I wanted to have a different approach to it than all the youth rallies I had ever gone to, where it's like all just like, hey, you know, the same sermons every time, all that sort of stuff. I wanted to focus on the joy of the Lord, and a lot of the stuff that kids don't get preached to about,
Yeah.
and stuff. So it was a different focus, and kind of the anti-religion one. It's like, look, you guys are gonna become adults. You guys are gonna have to decide for yourself. You know, the religion of other people can't be yours. It's got to be yours. If you grow up and leave and whatever, that's great. But here, let me show you what this means to me. And so I was really trying to take a different approach to it. And because it's just like I was getting so dissatisfied with everything else I was seeing,
Yeah.
So um, that happened. And then we were planning for the third one, and COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so when COVID hit, uh, that was tough enough. But my pastor didn't want to he we were doing the virtual services and stuff, and I helped get that set up. Like I was still going at that time, and he didn't want to do Sunday school and stuff because he really wanted us to meet back together. And so I was out of a job essentially. I wasn't doing things for my teens and everything, and that made me hit burnout pretty quick because for the type of person I am, I have to be doing something. Otherwise, I lose the ability to do the thing.
Hmm.
And when that hit, I really had to take a look at all the other stuff because we weren't going to church, and I was having problems just paying attention to the virtual ones and everything. And I started questioning things, and a big thing that I was questioning was LGBT stuff because um, I knew I was like, even back when we were in college, and now that marriage equality stuff was coming up, I was like,
Yeah.
look, guys, we're Baptists. We should be supporting marriage equality. We should, I mean, the government should get out of marriage. What's the government got to say about who and who can't get married? They're like, the government should be protected. Why? Like, why? It's a religious thing, and we have freedom of religion here. And I was like, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I
Yeah.
still believed it was a sin at the time,
Sure.
but I
Yeah, but
couldn't wrap
you were asking questions. You're not supposed to ask questions, Justin.
my see. That's one way that I was really raised differently is because the pastor I had towards the end there, my who's my uncle, um, one of the things that he raised his kids with, that I got influenced by, is question everything. We
Hmm.
should be questioning authority. Like, why you're gonna trust authority just because they say so? Got to question them. So I was raised with that attitude, and so
Yeah.
and I understand it. Like, yeah, they don't want you asking questions, but I wanted to ask questions. I was encouraged to, so I was ready. I was ready to deconstruct.
Yeah.
And like that's the thing is like um, he they always were like question authority, question everything, um, and that's just what I would. Oh yeah, my wife's told me that one of the things she was told was to doubt your doubts, and I'm like
Doubt your doubts.
that like I'm like that was so bizarre to me that like blew my mind. Like that's so wrong. It's like how can you need to know things. You need to look at things.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
anyways. But yeah, so I kept on pushing back against that, and it's like the funny thing is like a lot of Christians wouldn't outright say they disagreed with me,
Yeah.
because I was making good points, but occasionally I get the strangest looks, and they're like, "But what about?" I'm like, "What do you mean? We believe in liberty. We're Baptists.
Yeah.
If there's
Yeah.
any denomination that believes that gay people should have the right to marry, it should be Baptists." And
Yeah.
like,
Well, it's funny to me is also, now we have the benefit of being 15 years in the future from when we graduated, and like easily four of our classmates that I can think of are now members of the LGBT community, right?
mhm,
So it's the percentages the same percentage of people that you would see normally in any group of people that identify as LGBT,
mhm,
it was the same at the Baptist Fundamental Bible College.
mhm,
We just didn't know it at the time, right?
yeah,
So I mean, that's a pretty good argument for the fact that, um, man, people might just be this way. Maybe they're not just sitting against God.
mhm. And yeah, and here's the thing is like I I and you could just put that number to five because even though I am in a straight relationship and monogamous and all the above, you know, so outwardly to outward world they don't have any problem, but after a lot of soul searching, I discovered that I'm pan. So uh, which is the which is the sparkling wine version of bi.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's the pretentious one. But that's the whole thing. Is like I discovered that about myself, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Now, was this before or after the questions had begun?
So here's the thing: is I it was it was it was after that I realized it. But I was saying these things the entire time because here's the thing: is like I would be like, because I was trying to figure this stuff out and everything. And it's like, and I'm like, I think everyone's just bi. And I would say things like that. And I'm like, I know that's not really how it works, but I think everyone's just bi and things like that. I would say things, and it's like we just have preferences, you
Yeah.
know, and not realizing that no, you just have a lack of preference. That
Mm-hmm.
was what it was for me. It's like I just have a lack of preference, and because it was never an option, for me, I was unaware of it. I never ended up with a guy, but it's like I don't have a preference. I
Yeah.
ended up with Rebecca because that was what the culture demanded and everything, and I am not upset about that. She's not either, but like, that's the thing. It's like that's why. So,
It's, I guess the part that's crazy to me is, I mean, you do see Christianity as a whole, the church as a whole, really migrating on this issue.
hmm
Having said that, you really can't get away from what the text actually says, right? So when you think about the passages, both Old Testament and New,
hmm
right? But Romans always comes to mind. Like, you know, and actually, I should let you finish your story too, because so let me put a
hmm
pin in my question. You
yep.
probably have an idea of where I'm going here, but I want to get a sense of how you understand the Bible, how you view the Bible as well.
hmm
So proceed with your story, and let's get to let's kind of get to where you are today,
Yeah.
and then we can dive into all sorts of questions.
Yeah. So to skip ahead a little bit, it's just like I realized by the time that I had deconstructed, I found a large uh, uh, community on Twitter. Most of them have migrated over to Blue Sky now, but like a bunch of ex-evangelicals is what they call themselves,
Yeah.
ex-fundies, and like they, like there's one a really popular one that was part of MacArthur's church and everything, and like he married her,
Mhm.
and she was instrumental and huge in it. And I follow a bunch of pastors, which we'll probably get into later with some of the other questions, but that understand that movement. In fact, I talked to so it a lot of this came to a head when I talked to one pastor and asked him about biblical marriage. And it's like, where is that in the scriptures? And he's like,
Yeah.
it's not. It's like, and it's like, and really coming to grips with, oh yeah, there's no real biblical marriage in the scriptures. I'm like, there isn't. It's like, yeah, Jesus describes how how marriage is in one section, but there's no commandment about it. And there's also there's almost zero evidence. There's almost zero examples of what a fundamentalist will call biblical marriage.
Yeah, you almost just have to infer
hmm
in the Old Testament that the woman that you sleep with becomes your wife. Like it's the act, it's almost the sexual act that makes the marriage covenant that we read about in the Old Testament there. I
hmm
mean, that's how I've inferred it over time. I've never seen a clearer
Yeah.
example of what it's supposed to be.
hmm Yeah.
So I might have many wives.
But yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. It's like that's it's the one of the things that, and this would probably be its own separate discussion, but parsing all this out, I
Mm-hmm.
really came to the conclusion that maybe you could sin against God, but sin here on earth only is when you hurt someone else. It's only when you're hurting someone else. You can't you can't sin by some basic well, I mean, you can't sin with consenting adults. You know, if you're not hurting someone, you're not sinning. And that's the thing. Is like if you look at all the examples of what Bible actually labels as sin, aside from the stuff that's specifically us to God,
Mm-hmm.
it's all it's all that sin is all stuff that you're doing against someone. You know, and like yeah, it talks about fornication and all this sort of stuff, but does it really? Like, have you looked at all those passages in a row? It's like, what is the Bible really saying here? Is it good advice or is it actually calling it sin?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and that it kind of hit me hard when I figured out that, oh, sin is only what is sin is when you're hurting someone else. That's a biblical definition of it. And so if you want to tell me that two people in a relationship that are the same sex are sinning, you're gonna have to try harder.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's how I think about it. Because, like, yes, there's a relational aspect to sex, but also, and like every guy in the world knows this, there's also just the aspect of like people who just get off.
Mm-hmm.
And people get off on all kinds of stuff, right? And people keep the socially unacceptable ones private, and then the other ones, it's still kind of taboo, right, to talk about, but sometimes it's talked about maybe amongst guys or whatever the case is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't really know what the difference is in how anybody gets off, right? Like I just don't know what is the actual difference to the up to and until the point of what you said, right? If you're no longer with a consenting adult, okay, now you have a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing to me is that like we sat here and we came up with like this structure of here's all the things that you're allowed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and then here's the things that you're not allowed to do. Because like I even think about the conversation, of course, going back to school, like anything premarital was considered like
Mm-hmm.
major taboo. Like they didn't want us holding hands with somebody, right? because because they didn't know what it was going to lead to, and and it's like that's just not part of what the Bible has to say. There's no text you can point to back that up. They built their own doctrine.
Yeah, and honestly, talking about that, and because here's the thing: is like you can't say that sometimes some of those opinions can't be good advice. Okay, but that doesn't make it Bible.
Right.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like that's where they always told us our religion was more about a relationship than it was a religion. But that's the thing, is that's where the religion aspect really comes in, is when you are adding things.
Yeah.
um you are taking things that are good advice for a certain group of people and making them religious law. And when you make something a religious law like that, and that's what I was fighting against with my youth group thing, is like with my youth rally, was you know that legalism that
Mm-hmm.
was just killing these kids.
Yeah.
It was these kids would never get a good view of religion. Not that they need one, but like they would never get a good view of religion when all they see is people being hypocrites. And
Yeah.
the thing is, people should be allowed to be hypocrites. But when you're saying you're not one, that's the problem. It's like when you are not admitting that you're a person that grows, and oh, this thing is inconsistent in my life. Well, yeah, that's because I need to get better at this.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh yeah, no, all you teenagers, you guys have to obey these rules, whereas we never did have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because you have the written rules and you have the unwritten rules. Some of the funny written rules
Hmm.
that we used to have would be like when you're sitting in church with a girl, you had to have a hymnal in between you, so that or a hymnal's length in
Hmm.
between you, so you'd be abstaining from the appearance of evil because if people saw you touching, like who knows what
Yeah.
that would do. Remember the girls weren't allowed to wear graphic tees that had like words across the boobs because that would bring, would bring attention. It's like, hold on, you already have the skirt down to the ankles and the like the turtleneck on, but you can't put anything across the. Okay, cool. Like and those were the written rules. But then you have the unwritten rules of oh, you need to be in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Oh, by the way, you should be in a suit, right? If you're going to be one of the members in good standing, even on a Wednesday night, you should at least have a collared shirt on, probably a tie. Like these were the kinds of things that if you wanted to have any kind of social status, I guess I'll call it within the church, then you had to follow the unwritten rules as well, and so did your family, or else you were ostracized.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that does though, the purity culture, because that's that's something that I've had a bunch of discussions online with the community about as well. That purity culture is how that just it it's damaging to everyone because
Sure.
I've talked about someone about how it really like leads to misogyny because just on how it treats women like prizes and men as competitors. It dehumanizes it because that's the thing is like it's not even a misogynist point of view. It really uh, puts everyone down because it's like when it's like that's why the dating culture was so horrid because you were in competition and you had to win and women were prizes and all that sort of stuff and it's like um it's that whole purity culture thing was so and but the thing is it's all because the imagined sexual ethics that they had to put out. It's like if we don't make a rule about it, what are we going? We're just going to let them do what they do. Let adults do what they want to do.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
in Christianity. There's a certain level of that sexual ethics that they have to. So they pile on the rules. But
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
rules become so they become so oppressive, and it's
Yeah.
like you were highlighting how ridiculous they are, but it's like I can tell you that I know plenty of people who would be like, yeah, so what are you just going to let them have sex if they want to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, because
Well,
they're
and
adults, and it's like that's the thing. It's like if you want them to have your sexual ethics, you have to make a case for it.
they weren't making a case for it. They were just
Exactly.
saying, absolutely not. This is a good place to remind you that if you're enjoying this content, if you're getting value from this content, hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and consider sharing this with someone who might benefit from its message. We appreciate you joining us. Let's keep going with the episode. I failed to mention for this conversation, by the way, so we've got the Holy Spirit who's joined us in the
Hmm.
chat, and so we will have some comments and questions coming in from the chat
Yeah.
as we're talking here. And there's one that I think is interesting in just thinking about. So he says, what about the verse in the Bible that states it's good for a man not to touch a woman?
Yeah.
That's 1 Corinthians 7
7.
and verse 1,
Yeah.
right? Now, concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, so that's Paul talking, I guess, to the Corinthians, supposedly. It's good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Okay. Your thoughts, Justin?
Well, in general, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a whole lot of sexual shenanigans going on in the Corinthian church. And Paul had to put a lot of things straight. he's not saying anything. It is good for a man not to touch a woman.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll tell you
because
this
also
part.
specifically in verse 1, it says, concerning the things that whereof you wrote unto me,
Yeah,
it's it is good for a man. So right there we have context that is lost to us.
sure. Oh yeah, but
So that can't be a commandment for us unless we know that context that he's referencing in
yeah,
my
and
printed first.
you get some clues throughout the book
Hmm.
of Corinthians, but here's what I'll say: you got to go down a little further, right? And you look at verse 7. I would that all men were even as myself. This is Paul still speaking. Um, let's see. Basically, but I'm not. I actually got the wrong verse there. But basically, he's saying, "I wish that everybody was unmarried like me, because then they could focus their entire attention on the things of God." But he also says that most of you that would be a stumbling block for. And so you should have a wife, right? If you can't focus on the things of God, you should have a wife. So when I think about Paul saying it's good for a man not to touch a woman, I would also say it's like, okay, it's good for a man to take his vitamins, right? So he can stay healthy. Like, yeah, that's a thing that's good for a man, but it doesn't mean that everybody's going to do that. And it's I don't look at that as a commandment of Paul speaking on behalf of God, saying thou shalt not touch a woman. There's a big difference between those two statements.
Well,
It's good for you not to do this. Oh, and by the way, thou shalt not.
yeah, and I mean, it, also just going off of it, it's like, so that means that if you are going to teach it as commandment, then that means that no one's ever going to have kids. So
Yeah.
obviously there's context we're missing,
Yeah.
and that's the whole thing. It's like, um, but yeah, no, but
And
Paul also queer icon because he's ace.
tell me more.
We just talked about him being celibate on purpose.
Yeah, yeah,
I I I I postulate that Paul was asexual.
okay,
And I further follow that up with the fact that he was definitely autistic. And autistic people have higher rates of queerness than neurotypical people. So,
okay. I have never heard this before, so
hmm
let's just you say definitely autistic, so let's hear it.
oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. If you look at the logic that he uses and the way that he is about things, I mean, first of all, he was a Pharisee. He was
Yeah,
into the law. He knew it, memorized it backwards and forward. He was very nerdy, you know, and that's one of the big markers of autism is having specialized interests like that. um, Also, that specific line, and now this might lean more to ADHD, but that specific verse where he says, "The things that I would do, I do not, and the things that I would not do, I do."
yeah,
Well, that's right there is something I say about myself every day when I don't take my ADHD meds.
okay,
Like that's literally my problem that I have with my brain is I struggle doing the things that I want to do because that switch is broken in my brain.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if Ed Paul's telling us right here that he has ADHD, it's like he is definitely neurodivergent of a sort because no one else just because of the logic that he uses is kind of very um, engineer like, very computer
yeah.
programming.
Well, you heard it first here, folks.
Hmm.
Paul, the apostle, could have been on the spectrum. I do think it's interesting because back in that time, they obviously didn't have any diagnosis for things like this. Number one, number two, there was no middle ground, right, between normalcy and demon possessed, right? The only there's no spectrum here. Either you had a demon and you were crazy, or you were like everybody else. And that's just kind of how they thought
Yeah.
about it. Life was simpler.
Yep. Yep. That's definitely how it is. Um, That's definitely how it was. But
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
I've heard a lot of people make that case, and I'm like, and granted, I was like sticking to my guns just a second ago. I don't know for sure, but I definitely do love the fact that there is a lot of evidence that points to it
yeah.
being a possibility.
That's interesting. Okay, so here's what I want to do, Justin. Uh, Tell folks what, how would you classify who you are today from a religious standpoint? Just so, because
Mhm.
everybody has to put you in a bucket, so then they can
Yeah,
qualify everything else you say. So, what's your bucket?
yeah. So when I messaged you, I said I very much think of myself as a Christian, as agnostic, and in the sense that an agnostic person believes that there could be a God. Well, I believe that there is a God and that I have a personal relationship with Him. But I'm also definitely understand that I've got biases and that, you know, I'm looking at things from my perspective. I am fully
Mm-hmm.
assenting that I might not be correct. In that
Okay.
in that and I would love to talk to you about that. Is that sort of thing. It's like, you know what? I am not here to, I'll contend for myself and I'll tell you what I believe if you want, but I am not going to uh, put myself in a position higher than you just because our beliefs differ.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that's kind of where I am with faith in general. In terms of theology, if that's more what you're looking for, um,
Well, both. Yeah. Give us that too.
yeah, in terms of theology, I'm still very much Baptist or Anabaptist, I guess would be more technical, because I'm all about that liberty, the personal liberty. That if you're not giving it to everyone else, you're not going to get it yourself, sort of thing. It's like, and the Baptists that had that opinion in the past, those are really my idols. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of a lot of what I believe in general. But I've come to more of in terms of salvation and stuff, because of some pastors on Twitter and stuff talking about this. I've come to a more universalist position where that if there is a God, we're all gonna get to heaven.
Okay. So now, but you said if there is a God,
Hmm.
right? I thought your faith position sounded a little bit more solid than that a few minutes ago because of your personal relationship.
Yeah, because I am also autistic, like my champion Paul, and I always like to add qualifiers to things. So
Okay.
when I am talking about it, in the sense that to someone else, I will oftentimes say that because it's like, look, I don't know what's up or what's down,
Mm-hmm.
but if my God that I believe in is real, we're all going to heaven. Might be an even
Okay.
more qualified way to say it. If this God that I trust in and believe is, I believe that this is how he behaves.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
so would be a even more accurate way of saying it.
Okay. So then to further level set things for people, and I think this is the foundation upon which we can build our discussion, is um, when you say
Hmm.
that there's a God that you believe in,
Hmm.
that you have a personal relationship with, but I've also heard some things that make me think there could be some real challenges with the biblical text that we read. Where does the Bible come into play for you? Do you believe this is the Word of God? And if so, where do you stand on things like inerrancy and, inspiration of the Scripture?
Inerrance to believe in inerrancy, I understand all the points because I've argued them myself. Um, and and I definitely get that, but the fact of the matter is that you can't even, just the fact is that even though there's a lot I love about the King James, and that's still the one I use, but and I do think that there was a lot of bias that it missed out on, because of the way that it was translated. There's still the fact is that the way they had to translate whenever they talked about a king or tyrants and stuff, they were never able to use the word tyrant, even if they wanted to, because it's the King James Bible. Like, yes, there's a lot I respect about it, and studying the history of it, I think it's cool. It's amazing. It's like if you had all the brilliant minds in the world today working on translation, yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of cool things about it. But there's still the biases that came. And
Yeah.
so if you're going to argue inerrancy with me about that, it's like, no, it's like, yeah, I have a powerful God, but but there's just things that don't work there if you're
Yeah.
going to claim inerrancy like that. Now, do I think that God could preserve what He wants us uh, to read? Yeah, at the very least. But like, there's all the what about all the other translations in other languages? I
Mm-hmm.
know for a fact that um that the Spanish translation, one of the missionaries, says like, yeah, we have to do some of our own translating for these passages because the one that we have isn't isn't translated correctly. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, so to believe in inerrancy is a very white belief,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's a very American Eurocentric belief that, okay, English speaking people have an inerrant Bible and no one else does. And that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, now we're in racist territory. No,
Oh yeah.
it's like,
Well,
and
also, the fundamentalists sometimes go as far as saying that the King James version of the
it
Bible is the
wasn't,
inspired word of God. I did a reel last week with a pastor who said he could go back and correct the Greek with his King James version Bible. Who cares what the Greek says, right? Like that's that's the attitude that I think a lot of Christians, Protestants have no clue that there are people who actually believe the stuff about a one of the many translations into English of the text that we actually have. But I guess where
see,
you and I obviously differ,
yeah,
right, is I have become skeptical of
mm-hmm,
everything in terms of whether or not there is a God,
mm-hmm,
whether or not, if there is a God, that the Hebrew God Yahweh is in any way significant
mm-hmm,
in that story,
mm-hmm,
or was it just one of the many thousands of Middle Eastern religions that were very similar
mm-hmm,
to it that predated this Christianity
mm-hmm,
that we have? But the biggest questions that I have, and where we dig in on this channel quite a bit, is on the Bible itself.
mm-hmm,
Because when I look at the Bible, we, fortunately or unfortunately, because of how we were brought up and the movement that we were in, we read the Bible. I know for myself, I estimate I've read the Bible at least 25 times, and I still read the Bible today on a daily basis. I'm fascinated by it. But I read the Bible today as a skeptic, and I look at everything. And what I find is a book that is riddled with contradictions that cannot be reconciled. I find a book that has serious errors when it comes to science, when it comes to history, when it comes to um, just the translations, right, from the original text. We find serious errors there, and we also find a Bible that can be provably shown to have additions that came long after this original text was penned. I have a video coming out later this next week that's going to talk a little bit about some of those. But up to until the Middle Ages, we find things still being added to the text, such as the Trinity. So, how do you look at these things when you find clear contradictions, when you find errors? scientific inaccuracies, or do you? And what do you do with them?
So here's the problem. I'm not in college anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So when I had time, that was one of my favorite things to do. Look up this stuff, research it,
Yeah.
and things. So like for instance, the whole universalism thing. I really like what I learned about it. But could I talk to you for more than 5 minutes about it? No, because I haven't been able to go down a rabbit trail about it. And so when you're talking about all these skeptic things, um, so my wife deconstructed mm, much much before I did, and believe it or
Mm-hmm.
not, had very little influence on me deconstructing. It I was doing my own thing.
Wow.
Uh, in fact, I would say that my perspective on things caused her to deconstruct
Okay.
because she grew up hyper fundamentalist,
Yes.
whereas so I was like, who told you to doubt your doubts? No, you should be questioning things, you know? And there's a whole lot of other things I could go into why she deconstructed. I'm sure she could tell you, but with me though, it's like you're talking about all these skeptics. She's researched some of these things out. She's talked to me about some of the things that you mentioned about Yahweh and stuff like that, and all that sort of stuff. And I would love to deep dive into those things more. But in general, uh, the ones that I don't have time to look into, I just have to consent that there's something I don't know. And this is again part of the reason why I say Christian agnostic. I admit there's something I don't know. Maybe there is not a God. I'm fully aware that that might be a possibility. Um, but I'm going to trust in my relationship that I have with Jesus Christ and what he's done for me, you know? But I am fully aware of a lot of these contradictions, or at least supposed countries. Like I haven't gotten a chance to study these out like I want to, you know. But I will say, you know, back in the day, like the contradiction issue, I studied that a lot. You know, I looked at well, if I found something that was a contradiction, I found an answer as to why it wasn't. You know, or honestly, there were some where I came to the conclusion is like, you know, there's no satisfactory answer on this, but this doesn't ultimately affect my faith because, you know, this is something God will explain when we get there. You know, if it was depending on what it was, but that's the whole thing. It's like, um, you know, has it shaken my faith? Yeah, and those sort of things. Yeah, in their own way, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just I just haven't gotten the time because I work too much.
Yeah. That's fine. I mean, and we can
Hmm.
focus this on your experience, right?
Hmm.
So, I know you said you can't go more than surface level on universalism, but I want to talk about it because I think it's a fascinating viewpoint
Hmm.
that again, I'm skeptical of the entire text, so
Yeah.
I'm not I may need to play the role of the fundamental Christian to ask the questions here, right? But if you think about, like, is there a verse or actually I think I saw this up as the Holy Spirit was speaking. Is there a verse that you lean on that states that we are all going to heaven? And what if there are people who don't believe there's a heaven? Are they still going?
Um. So basically, and I can't even pull up because Firefox, believe it or not, crashed on me. So
Ah, I love
I
it. I
can't
love it.
even I can't even pull up, and my phone is actually not in front of me. So um, there's this pastor I followed. His name is Trey Ferguson,
Okay.
and he introduced me to a lot of things um, when it comes to just scripture and stuff. And you know, I he would talk. He's a black pastor, so he'd talk a lot about black theology and black liberation theology and stuff like that, or at least it would influence the way he would talk about things. And you know, learning exactly how racist the Southern Baptist Convention was, and it's like, what? Like, again, us being the type of fundamentalists we were, we thought even Southern Baptists were going to hell. But
Yeah, yeah.
they weren't actually Baptists,
Shouldn't have kept that Catholic hierarchy. We
Yeah.
could have been in heaven.
And so, you know, so yeah, so we believed that and everything. And um yeah, I'll have to get you his exact handle later. But
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so he pointed out, and so there isn't one specific verse, um but he pointed out why Jesus came to earth, and
Hmm.
he didn't come to leave anybody in hell.
Okay.
Essentially, like that's what it comes down to. Like he explains it so much more deeper in
Yeah.
that. I
I guess I would like to ask him because I mean, there are even some statements that Jesus made um, in in Matthew about everlasting punishment for those. Let me see if I can find it. Matthew 25, Matthew 25:46. He says, "And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal." So I'd be curious to see how he thinks about a verse like that, where this I mean it's Jesus himself saying that, or again, if the Gospels are accurate, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, let's see here. Yeah, so I just dropped it in the chat. His handle is um on Blue Sky. It's at Pastor Trey Trey05.com. And
Okay.
yeah, he's a really cool guy. I got his book. I haven't finished it yet. He talks a little bit about it in the book, but I haven't gotten to that chapter yet.
Okay.
Um, but
I'll
he,
make sure I put this. I'll put it into the show notes for
yeah,
people so they can
but yeah,
take a look into it.
he's and there's a lot of influential pastors, but that influenced my deconstruction journey. But he's the one that
Mm-hmm.
I first heard about the universalism, and it just like blew my mind when he really connected it. And I don't really know of a good answer to that because again, I haven't looked at it enough,
Yeah.
and it feels really weird for me too because being out of depth about something with theology because it's like again that was my life in college,
Yeah, it
and I
was.
wasn't
Yeah.
even going to be a pastor. I was going for education, but I loved that stuff. I lived
Yeah.
and breathed Bible. I took almost all the same classes that the pastor track took, and it's like I love studying these things out. I just
Okay.
haven't had the time to study it out, and not going to a church at the moment means there's no one to challenge me
Yeah.
on it. So
Okay. Well, look, if the channel can have some small impact on people, it's getting us all back into studying these
hmm
things,
yeah.
right? So, but we could just talk about your also kind of how you feel about things. Um, like, why do you feel that there needs to be a heaven?
So just as a quick content warning for anyone who experiences existential dread, fast forward because
Okay.
so here's the thing: it's like again, this is probably one of the bigger reasons why I consider myself Christian agnostic. Because as
Hmm.
much as I believe in God and believe in Jesus Christ, uh, there being a heaven is one of the more difficult concepts for me in general. Um, I um, I would get the concept of eternity to me would trigger existential dread. Doesn't matter how perfect of a heaven I could create, it would it was the worst panic attack, and of course, and my parents are great, they really are, and they are not your typical fundamentalists. But when I had that when I first experienced this existential dread as a kid, my mom got me some verses on why fear is sin.
Hmm.
That is not
Wow.
typical of her. She is
Yeah.
very, very receptive and loving, and but it's like, but what else are you gonna do when your kid is having a panic attack about eternity? You know, so
Well,
it's like
yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I
Well,
totally get it.
especially if you're a parent who believes that the alternative is your kid goes to hell. It's like,
Yeah,
well, hold on, let me make sure that you're going to be okay with eternity in heaven.
yeah. So and that's just and I dealt, so I dealt with it for a good little bit, and
Hmm.
and I think personally, I think part of it because I mentioned that I have, well, I didn't directly mention that also have ADHD, and one of the things with that is a thing called time blindness,
Okay.
meaning I don't understand the passage of time intrinsically. Like I understand it's a thing, but like it wasn't until because I didn't start taking Adderall or any form of stimulant medication until I was like 30. Um, I didn't understand that days were 24 hours long until I started taking Adderall. And it was a few weeks into it that I finally understand, oh, days are actually pretty short because it feels infinite for me.
Hmm.
Sitting at a stoplight is like infinity. It's it's all of time. I'm not don't feel like I'm waiting forever. I just feel like it is forever.
Hmm.
And it's like I'm not always that blind to time, but I just don't have the same context that people do with the and stuff. And so it's like, and I think that's part of the reason why when I would contemplate eternity, that it would really mess me up. Um, Now, the way I've gotten around it is by, and it doesn't always work, but the way I've gotten around it is by I'm like, oh, eternity is just a concept of time that I don't understand. It's
Hmm.
not actually forever. It's God's version of forever. Like it's so beyond us, that sort of existence, that it's not because again, eternity would be a much different version of time than we are experiencing right now.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the way I get around it. If heaven's really a thing, that's it.
Okay.
But like I said, that's part of the reason why one of the things that calls this all into doubt. It's like as much as I want my faith to be true, that's one of the things that I have trouble believing and understanding.
Okay.
And as much as I would
Well,
say, as much as I do believe it, it's like it's also like it's one of those things that sits in the back of my head.
I I can understand that feeling. I'll share that I also, and I've told many people this, like the idea of going and singing praises for 1,000 years, like 1,000 years, really, like that. That just sounds awful to me. Like, when do I get to hang out in my mansion on the streets of gold? Like, how come I can't just go hang out there? You guys go to this church service, and I'll catch up with you afterwards. Like, that concept was never even exciting for me. But I think one of the reasons why maybe you have some doubt, one of the reasons that I would put out there is that you're an otherwise pretty rational person. And the belief in an afterlife cannot be based in any real rationality, in my opinion. You
Hmm.
may you may think differently about that, but I struggle to see how we the many people are afraid of death, and I understand the need to put an answer to this unknown. But it's just not that much of an unknown for me because I can think back to what my life was like before it began, and it was nothing, right? Like, before I existed, I there's no it's not a place of uncertainty or fear or pain or anything along those lines. You just didn't exist. You didn't exist. And then you come into this world and you're faced with these types of questions that people, they just can't handle once you've been alive. You can't handle What is it going to be like when I'm not alive anymore? And one of my theories is that that's one of the couple of pillars that all religions are built upon, is either explaining what happens after you die and giving people a system in which to believe, or making it so that it matters less to you because of the enlightenment that you've received, for instance, or things along those lines, where it doesn't matter that your existence will kind of disappear. But that's to me, like, that's the rational way of thinking about this.
Hmm.
And I'm curious on, like, what's your take on that? Um, how do you, or do you feel like your thought of the afterlife is based somewhere in rationality?
I would say that you've pretty much summed up the reason why I would struggle with it, and I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
good summation of that. And I would counter with the reason why I have hope of anything different, because again, I agree with you in that in the sense that that's where my doubts do come from. I would say that the areas where because the whole thing is you can't have you can't have this faith hinge on nothing, otherwise it is completely irrational. It's got to hinge on something, and you know for me it's been my personal experiences. But again, personal experiences, those are those are biased. Those are there is there is no way to know what biases you come into these experiences, and that's what I'm acknowledging. Again, when I say Christian agnostic, is I am acknowledging that I am a biased person, that all of my proof that God exists come from my personal experiences with him. And there you go, because you can't prove that God exists, um, aside from personal testimony. And as miraculous as a book that you may or may not want to claim the Bible is, it's still a book, and I treat it as something that's living and that speaks to me. But again, it doesn't it doesn't have anything that a book doesn't have. It doesn't actually call out to you and stuff. And again, I think my experiences with the Bible have been spiritual. But again, I'm a biased person. That's the whole thing. And so acknowledging what you said, yeah, maybe this is all we get, you know. But
Is there anything about the Bible that, like, over the years you've held on to and thought, like, I mean, this is the reason why? Like, and I'll tell you, like, I've heard people tell me, uh, it's the prophecies, right, of the Bible and seeing how some of those have been fulfilled, which I have problems with, but like that's what people have said,
mhm,
right? Um, or it's the historical accuracy of the Bible in their opinion that allows them to say, well, if that's true, then maybe the rest of it is true, right? I Is there anything you latch onto or hold on to that's like, this is my evidence? It's my evidence. Doesn't have to work for everybody else, but this is what, here's why I believe anything outside of that personal relationship you're talking about in the Bible.
I think to the point, because I've talked about those in Sunday school, those points you mentioned previously and everything. I think those are neat, but they're parlor tricks, essentially. Um, that if the Bible is what it says it is, it's got to be taken the on exclusively on its power to change lives. And I think the Bible itself would support that. Is that if you are going to take it as a spiritual book, you have to take it on its power to change lives, not on its supposed scientific accuracies, not on its supposedly historical accuracies, not on its prophecies. No, you can't take it because first of all, Jesus doesn't want you depending on any of that, anyways. and second,
Wouldn't be real faith with it.
what?
Said it wouldn't be real faith if you were depending on
Yeah,
those. But yeah.
yeah,
Anyway,
and
keep going.
but also it's like it's life changing powers.
Okay.
And I do think that there is a crazy thing that happens when a person discovers certain simple truths from Jesus. Um, the fact, I mean, God, love your neighbor. It's like that. It's such a simple thing, and yet you have Christians fighting against that passage.
Yeah.
I literally saw people saying that you can't you can't call immigrants your neighbor. Like
Well,
like I'm like,
I
what do
I
you
think
think Jesus was saying here? What do you like seriously? It's like, oh,
yeah. I mean I think if we're going I maybe I know where they're coming from with that because what the original love your neighbor as yourself is back in Leviticus, a command from God, and it was specifically talking about your Jewish neighbors. It was not talking about the Canaanites there. But then Jesus takes it a step further, right? And seems to, and of course, he's taken the gospel to all. It's a whole different
yeah.
paradigm. But I do think it's. I've seen people make that argument, and which
But that's the thing is they
I can see
say
where they're coming from.
Jesus wasn't making that argument. I'm like, do you know that they hated the Samaritans more than they hated the Gentiles? Like like seriously, these were they were racist.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
and you're telling me that no, I it's only no. It's
yeah,
like, and that's the thing is when I think that lives are changed when you really internalize some things like that,
yeah.
and that's really to me is like if the Bible is going to continue to have any impact in my life, it's going to be how I practice those teachings of Jesus.
Okay, okay. The Holy Spirit speaking to us through the chat
Mm.
here is asking, do you guys believe the Bible is spiritual, historical, literal, figurative, so on? You want to take a stab at that first, or should I?
Um, you could go ahead.
Okay. So, obviously, I laid out earlier what my view of the Bible is, in that it has challenges, it has what I believe are contradictions. I don't think the text is reliable in terms of what it actually was from the beginning. Um, and the God that it is speaking about is not a God that I find myself particularly wanting to know all that well
You mean
because
the
I
one that caused a flood that killed all these people?
caused a flood to kill all these people, that hardened Pharaoh's heart even after he was about to let go of the children of Israel just so he could kill the babies, that commands the killing of women and children in a neighboring country that he wants the land to be given to his people. Like that that God I have feelings about that I can't reconcile. And so my view of the Bible is that this is not I know it to not be historically accurate when I think about it being literal. If it's not literal, I don't know what else it can be, right? Because the minute you take anything figuratively in the Bible, in my opinion, you no longer can make the argument that anything is literal anymore. Because what's your methodology? What's your criteria for saying what's figurative and what's not? Was the Garden of Eden figurative? Was the flood figurative? All these things that we can't make work within the science and history that we know about. If you make any one of those things, I shouldn't make a blanket statement because there are certainly figurative statements in the Bible. So I don't want this to
Yeah,
come
but
across.
I
I'm talking
understand what you're
about like
saying there.
historical events, things that people say, we know this couldn't have happened like this at the time that the Bible says, so it must be figurative. But once you do that, then I don't know what else how you can choose what to take literally.
It's
So
Yeah, you're saying essentially that if the Bible is saying something is literal and it can't be literal, then and you're so you just want to change your mind on that. It's like the people that say, "Oh, I was just joking," after the fact.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. It's like if the Bible is saying it's literal and you're saying it's literal, and then we prove that it couldn't have been literal, no takebacks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a problem. But I do think that there is some value in reading the Bible. I'm still a daily Bible reader. I study the Bible daily. A lot of it now I'm even doing it more so for this channel, right? To be able to make sure I've got good information to share with folks. But in terms of the value that it can provide, I think there is some value. Like Aesop's fables, absolutely, right? Like there's these are stories that can teach a lesson, that can help people to find meaning, to get through difficult circumstances. And there's a lot in there that can be used. So I don't discount the Bible and say that it's worthless by any means. I think there is real value, but I really question anyone who wants to point to everything we see around us and say it's this God from this book. He's the one that did this, and none of the other ones are real. This is the one real one.
Hmm.
That's where it kind of falls apart for me. So that's my answer. You can
I
give it a
think
stab.
I would say that's the thing though is right there is that's what has me as a Christian agnostic is because it's like, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Like, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And, you know, I've researched my faith out enough for me to believe it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And after,
And when you say believe, can I just ask a question about that?
yeah,
Scale of 0 to 100. 100, I have no doubts. I am all the way in. I know where my soul is going, and 0 being I don't believe any of that stuff. What's Give me a number when you say I believe this.
um, that's interesting. Because if I were to say how comfortable I am,
It's not a trick question, by the way.
yeah, no, I know. Look, I don't care. I don't care who sees this. It might be a long talk at the dinner table, but
Right.
Um, uh, no, if I had to say how comfortable I am where I'm at right now, that's a different thing entirely. But I would say I'm, I am 99% comfortable where I am, and that 1% is just where I continue to challenge myself and question things. In terms of how confident am I that um that there is a God, that going to heaven, all that sort of stuff. How confident am I of that? I would say, I would have to say, to be honest, would be 50-50. Only because it's truly unknown to me. I would not know where that dice goes.
Mm-hmm.
I see enough out there to know that I am comfortable making a bet on it,
Okay.
but that I also see enough out there to know that I could be wrong.
What are those things for you?
The things that point um that I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, honestly, a lot of what you said.
Yeah.
Like the God of the Old Testament being a different God than that of the New Testament, for one thing, for starters. You know, um, and yeah, there's ways to rationalize that, but there's just some questions I have, and I would have for God when I meet Him. You know, about that. It's like, is this really you? That sort of thing. It's like there's a lot of incongruity there.
Yeah.
In
It's like,
addition,
did you really command them to murder and rape women and children? Because if so, can I leave? Can I leave this heaven, or am I stuck here now?
yeah. Well, that's the thing is like if um um, if my God commanded that, then I don't want to be serving that God, sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So I don't care. I don't care if I'm going to hell if that's the God that's claiming me. I forget
That's how
it.
I feel.
You know,
Yeah.
and so that's the thing. It's like now, on the other hand, it's like I will admit that I don't know everything. Maybe there is a way to explain this, but I also don't see it. You know, it's
I
like
mean, yeah.
you,
Here's what we do know. It would take some serious acrobatic moves to find a way to be able to explain this, at least in our rational, human, little puny minds that
yeah.
we have, right? Which is not the mind of God. I know there's people thinking that right now. And God's ways are bigger than our ways, greater than our ways.
Well,
I get it, but like you lose me at a certain point.
hmm
Let me pose the question a little bit differently to see if your percentage changes, because you said if there is a God, we're 50-50 on that. Let's say, let's talk specifically about this God,
hmm
the Hebrew God Yahweh. What's your percentage that there could be another God who did all this and who's just like off exploring other universes, or the multiverse or whatever? Like, what's your percentage of certainty that this God is the one that would be responsible for this, if there is a God?
um, yeah. So I don't. I would say, in terms of how he's presented and everything, um, in terms of the explanation that Baptists and other Protestants would like to give about his behavior, um, for that time and everything, you know, I would say, again, because I just haven't researched it out. I would say probably about the same. But that's the thing, is like, again, if he is, and again, this is the reason why I have those doubts, is like, is there's just that incongruity there between the God of the Old Testament and God of the New Testament, that I just, that is enough to be part of the reason why I doubt in the first place. you know so it's like, you know so really, that's the thing, is considering that as is part of the reason why I have the doubts. So specifically asking about that God really is the whole reason why there's a the negative 50 there anyways. So
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, right? When you think about
mhm.
like whether or not like everything we believed could be totally wrong. I guess I'm left with this thought that the possibilities are endless.
Mhm.
Like, and um, when you actually look back, you'll remember the Hebrew word. Actually, I'm seeing some stuff in the comments here too. The Hebrew word Elohim, right? In the beginning, God, Elohim. It's a plural. It's not singular, and we have just accepted that as, oh well, that must prove the Trinity, right? See, but Elohim, like when you really look back at it and you look back at the cultural context, right? If you go back beyond the Bible, and now we're learning so much more about Sumer and and Babylonia, right? And these places that predate what is supposed to be the known world, at least the biblical world. And we're finding out that they believed in a pantheon of gods. And the main god was this god El, and El had 70 sons. By the way, he had two sons. One was named Yahweh, and one was named Baal. Very interesting, isn't it? Right? And of those 70 sons, right, you have the Elohim. These are the powerful ones, the gods. And the Canaanite people believed in all 70 of these gods. So it's fascinating when you receive stuff in the Bible, like the battle between Yahweh and the prophets of Baal, right? And when you see stuff like looking back at Exodus when the Ten Commandments are given, and God says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," not denying that there are no other gods, but don't have them before me. That is like mind blowing to me when I think about it in the context of what the Canaanite people believed. And you have to remember, where did God call Abraham out of? Ur of the Chaldees. Where is Ur? Ancient Sumeria. You can still go see the ziggurat of Ur today, like they've rebuilt it in modern day Iraq. Like, Abraham was a Canaanite. He believed in the pantheon of gods. And then Yahweh selected him to go ahead and make a great nation of. So I look at stuff like that, and I know there's a ton of nuance there, so people are probably going to rip me apart in the comments for even bringing this up. But I find it fascinating, and I don't think there's any problem with asking these types of questions.
Well, and here's the thing, though, too, is, and my wife brought this up to me a while ago, so I'm familiar with everything you're saying. Um, she brought that up exactly. But here's the thing, too, is like this, what you're saying, too, is no threat in and of itself to Christianity. Either you have it or you don't. So you talking about this and postulating about this shouldn't cause anyone a crisis of faith, because if your faith is that weak in the first place, you didn't have the faith. Just to be talking about mythology. Either you have a relationship with a god or you don't, and it's like something like this. I don't see. I can understand people wanting to argue about it in the comments, but it's like we're talking about theology and myths and everything. And it's like, forget that. Like, seriously.
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason why I probably see it a little bit differently than you.
Hmm.
I think the reason why it matters is when you look at this in the context of the pantheon of gods, it starts to sound a lot more like the Greek and Roman mythology that we all dismiss without even a single thought. We just dismiss it like, yeah, those gods aren't real. We all know that's not real. Even though they were the predominant gods of that day, they were worshipped by basically everybody in the known world during that time. And the interesting thing to me about the Greeks and Romans is that their gods were never exclusive. They never said, this is the one God and we can't have any more. As a matter of fact, when the Roman Empire came to power, they brought in some of the Greek gods, right? Some of the Egyptian gods. But the famous one is Zeus became Jupiter, right? They said, yeah, this is the God above all gods now. We now have this God. And it was only Christianity that said, no, there's just the one. I shouldn't even call it Christianity. It's really the Yahweh, tradition. Like, that's the only faith that was saying, no, there's only one God. We have one other historical piece of evidence about a single God, monotheism, going back to like 3000 BC Egypt. King Tut's father, Akhenaten, the heretic king, right? He was the first to present like this monotheistic faith. So these are like the two stories that we think about. And I guess for me, it makes it that much more plausible if we're indeed talking about the Canaanite pantheon that none of this is real.
Hmm.
More plausible to me. I don't ever say that it's not real. I always leave room for the miraculous. I've not
Yeah.
yet seen the
Hmm.
miraculous, and I want to, but when I think about it, the logic train leads me down this path, and then I'm like, yeah, what's the most likely thing? Mythology.
Yeah. No, I follow what you're saying there. I should say, what I was referencing is just in the idea, because I would say that this is definitely supports that. But I would say this. shouldn't be someone's linchpin for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that's what I was referencing when I
yeah,
said that. But yeah, no, I totally follow that. And it makes a whole lot of sense, and I agree. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I let the Holy Spirit move right onto the screen with a couple of the comments that were
Hmm.
coming in. So
Yeah.
um,
You know
this is
what's
fascinating.
what's funny
Yeah,
is that the Holy Spirit tells us that they don't want the kids knowing that about the many gods Abraham worshiped. It's funny. It's like that was something that I knew about even as a kid though. Like I understand that it wasn't maybe regularly taught, but it's like that was one of the things. Like yeah, Abraham worshipped a lot of gods, and that's why God called him out of that. It's like,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but again, I got a little different than the typical fundy.
yeah.
So it's like,
No, 100%. Well, look, I feel like this has been a
hmm
really interesting discussion. Here's where I want to wrap things up,
yep,
is I would love for you to talk about um, just what do you say to the person out there, whether they're fundamentalist or not, right? But who is questioning their faith, who's seeing a lot of the things that we've talked about here today and is just challenged in their beliefs. What do you tell that person, about just taking the first step and, asking these questions? How do you advise them? How do you guide them?
well, for me, a lot of it was I couldn't. It again, a lot of the deconstructed started because I the Christian that I was raised to be couldn't be a Christian in this church. And so that's where that first step hit for me. It's like I could not, and I'm glad I got out when I did, essentially, because it's just like it got crazier and crazier. And like there are still good people I know that that would agree with me on a lot of things, not all of them necessarily, but like they still stayed in it. But the people in the churches as a whole just just were not the Christians I was raised to be. And so that's when that's what started the journey for me. It wasn't about uh again, it wasn't about seeing what sins I could get away with. You know, it wasn't about that. And they say that just so honestly that would be the biggest thing to challenge is are you unhappy with the Christian you are? And second is are they just telling you, is it a sin or is it the fact that you uh, I'm not making the connection right now, but it's like they say that just to keep you unquestioning things. And if you want to and if you are having these doubts that this is for you because you don't like the way it's going, that's why they're telling you that. It's just to it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because I mean in a lot of ways because like they say, oh, first it's music and then you're drinking and then it's this. No, it's just when you realize that you were lied to about so many things, maybe you were lied to about everything.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's like and so, you know, I would realize I realized that I was being lied to about music, but it's like I deconstructed independent of that. But
mm-hmm.
any fundamentalist youth pastor would use me as an example. Is like, see, he started listening to whatever, and now he's not in church. It's like, no, you guys lied to me,
Yeah,
and now I'm not in church. Own
yeah.
up to that.
See, I guess the thing that is the takeaway for me in this conversation is, and I think can be the takeaway for anyone who's questioning their faith,
Hmm.
is it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? Justin, you're a prime example of
Hmm.
someone who says, I'm throwing away a lot of this stuff, but here's what I'm keeping and here's why. And yes, I have doubts. Yes, I have hope for, what I want this to be, but it doesn't all have to go away. It's still what I'm hearing is that it's still providing some value
Mm-hmm.
in your life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where like this is a faith is a journey. It's a spectrum. Like it's cliche, but like it's true. It really is true. People are in various places here, and I often tell people that I see myself as doubting Thomas. I'm just one of those people that need some evidence to believe. I need God to reveal himself to me.
Mm-hmm.
I need to see the hands, the side. Like, that's where I'm at today.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not possible, but I'm saying it looks really unlikely. It
Mm-hmm.
looks really implausible.
Yeah.
Show yourself to me. Like, why can't I be. Why am I not worthy as Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
of that type of revelation? That's all I'm
Yeah.
asking for. And you're in a very different place, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have much more belief than I have.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of what the fundamentalist argument would be. It's like God's already given you all the proof you're gonna get. It's like Gideon. Come on. Like seriously.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny. This has been fun, man. I'm glad we did this. For those of you who watched and listened up until this point, congratulations, you made it through. But also to support the channel, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well if you're not already, because we're going to continue to have conversations like these. And I think this is fascinating stuff. We've had different conversations with people who are in very different places in faith, and I'm learning something in every single conversation. So I hope you are too. With that said, this is another episode of Faith in Question, and we will see you all next time.